On the telly now, it's Poirot, and Poirot is the one who's going to solve the crime. You'll be found out by Poirot, and if you're lucky you'll only end up doing time. For you know that most of these murders foul would end up with you being hanged in jail. Without fail, that's what would happen to you. So if there's a crime, call Poirot, yes Poirot, and Poirot is about to go and solve this crime right now. On the telly now, it's Poirot, it's Poirot, it's Poirot, it's Poirot.
The third international heat takes place next week when the host country will be Yugoslavia. It's a knockout next Tuesday at 7:50. They're starting on BBC Two, Jazz with Parisian pianist Jack Vidal in London. And here on BBC One, it's full steam behind for Foggy, Clegg and Compo and the first programme of an absolutely new series of Last of the Summer Wine.
Hello!
Hello,
I'm Andrew.
I'm Lisa.
Welcome to episode 32
Of Round the Archives.
of Round the Archives. I was getting confused as to what our numbering system
Yes.
is till Warren pointed out that now we're in the 30s.
Yeah.
It's 32 means it's February.
Yes.
Because,
Yes. That is so simple, but it hadn't occurred to
I
us.
should have worked that out because
Yes.
I've. The trouble is, I'm working on episode 33 as well, so I
It's a
can't
bit
get into my
confusing.
head where on earth
where
we
you
are. But anyway, welcome everyone.
Yes.
Lots to get through again.
Bumper issue.
Lots and lots of voices, and that will happen again next month.
Yes. Yes. We are inundated with lovely articles.
Indeed.
So thank you to everybody that has sent us an article.
Indeed. So first off, as you may have guessed from the opening song,
Yes.
Martin Holmes will take a look at
Poirot.
Poirot. Debuting at the tail end of the 1980s and destined to run on and off for another 24 years, and adapting with relative faithfulness to the source material all of his adventures as written by Agatha Christie, ITV's version of Poirot is, at least initially, a masterclass in adapting a well-known and long-running literary character for the small screen. Forget all of the other versions, because, just like with Jeremy Brett as Sherlock Holmes and Joan Hickson as Miss Marple, David Suchet's Poirot is pretty much the definitive version and is unlikely to be surpassed for a very long time, if ever, given the way television has changed in the intervening years. Those casting directors back then really knew what they were doing, didn't they? Some later episodes do deviate some way from the original words of Agatha Christie, with little reason given that her plotting and lean but insightful character studies are usually so immaculate, but these early stories are absolutely right on the money. There's still some who claim Agatha Christie was just a horrible old racist who ought not to get the praise she deserved, much of that based around some admittedly unfortunate stereotyping prevalent during the times the books were being written, and that one regrettable book title which used to use a word that we don't use nowadays in polite company, and which used to draw sharp intakes of breath from me and people of my generation and age group when even my own grandmother used to use it to describe a paint colour. I kid you not. But despite all that, Hercule, not Hercules, Poirot is a Belgian, not French, refugee who has made a good life for himself in the England between the wars by using his considerable deductive powers and his astonishing little grey cells to great effect. The opening episode, The Adventure of the Clapham Cook, written by the writer once ubiquitous for that kind of period drama, Clive Exton, and directed by Edward Bennett, was first broadcast on the 8th of January 1989 and very quickly shows pretty much all of the building blocks for the series as a whole already in place. Aside from Poirot himself, there's Captain Hastings, played with effortless, nice but dim charm by Hugh Fraser, the snappily efficient and loyal Miss Lemon, played by Pauline Moran, and the wonderfully bewildered but pragmatic Inspector Japp from Scotland Yard, played with quiet brilliance by Philip Jackson right from the get-go, all of whom would, to a lesser or greater extent, stick with the series, when required, right through to the end almost a quarter of a century and 13 series later. And they're all pretty much perfect casting. There's an old interview, that my beloved's mother occasionally refers to, with Joan Hickson, the actor responsible for breathing life into another definitive version of an Agatha Christie character, where she claims that finding the character was all about the shoes and getting the walk right. And in the strangely computerised Art Deco-ish title sequence, which admittedly has aged tad and was wisely dropped in the later adaptations, Hercule Poirot definitely has a distinctive walk which, if the stories are to be believed, may have had something to do with David Suchet clutching a coin between his buttocks. The hour-long version of the series comes as a bit of a shock to viewers more used to the later feature-length version, which became the norm once the short stories had been pretty much all used up, but follows the model successfully used by Granada for most of its earlier The Adventures, Return, Casebook and Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes series, and this format stuck around for several years and was quite successful for much of the first 5 years until the more event style of the occasional feature-length stories finally took over for good. The episode itself opens with a once not quite a Doctor Who Dermot Crowley sweatily packing a hefty-looking trunk in a room somewhere. There's a lot of rope tying and intensity and the shock of a vase smashing, and whilst he might just be packing a trunk, well, he might also not be, given that this is the shiny new murder mystery series known as Agatha Christie's Poirot, although the viewer might be distracted from its significance by the cast and credits popping up on screen while all this is going on. The action immediately shifts to Florin Court, representing the delightfully symmetrical Whitehaven mansions, the Art Deco-style apartment building where Hercule Poirot, a lover of order in the chaos of life, rather naturally chooses to reside. The first we see of our hero is his spats perched aloft as he rests, and a tracking shot moves along his immaculately clad body to his face as, in a fit of almost Holmesian ennui, we find Monsieur Poirot contemplating the boredom of his existence with his loyal colleague Captain Arthur Hastings, who is going through the papers desperately trying to find a case worthy of contemplation by those little grey cells, whilst being distracted, as he will, by his own irrelevant flights of fancy. Several cases are dismissed, including a £90,000 bond robbery which, whilst being a king's ransom, is disappointingly not being used to ransom a king, and Poirot seeks a case of national importance to occupy his mind, otherwise he will touch it not. And so Poirot is instead fretting about the single spot of grease on his suit, and dealing with his overcoat and maybe giving his moustache a much overdue trim, when Miss Lemon bursts in with the grateful news that there is a lady to see him, and they are rescued from an afternoon of dealing with such mundane matters by a visit from Bridget Forsyth as the unreasonable Mrs. Todd, who is in search of her missing cook. Watching this, I was reminded of the vague sense we got a couple of decades ago that we were being stalked by Bridget Forsyth. Well, either that or we were inadvertently stalking her ourselves, because she coincidentally turned up in the audience at several theatrical events we also attended. Even now we keep an eye out for her, even though we know it is terribly unlikely that she will appear. The scene here is a rather wonderful introduction to Poirot and his little foibles, from bristling at having been approached to investigate something as mundane as a missing domestic, to outright exasperation when Mrs. Todd suggests that he may himself have written a piece that she had seen in the newspaper praising his talents. Not that we put it past him. But Mrs. Todd is a terrifying force of nature, and her suggestion that he is too proud to take on such a trivial case, and that to someone like her a good cook's a good cook, and is just as great a loss, charms Poirot enough to take a car ride with her over to 88 Prince Albert Road, Clapham. At the moment, of course, we are supposed to suspect that maybe it is the missing cook who is the victim here, and of course it turns out that she is, but this being an episode of Poirot, perhaps not in the manner we at first think. On the way to the Todd's suburban semi-detached idyll, we see some beautifully recreated street scenes as their classic vintage car crosses Chelsea's Albert Bridge, which has been redressed back to the 1930s look, and where there are several other vintage vehicles and a host of extras in period dress, proving to the viewer that some serious money has been spent on this lavish-looking series. We also get to see Clapham Common as we pass by, also dressed with a full range of extras, so they're really not messing about here. A scene plays out with Poirot, Hastings and Mrs. Todd in the back of her car, and we discover that Eliza Dunn has sent for her travelling box, the large trunk we hopefully remember from the opening scenes, and we also learn that Mrs. Todd has, or had, two servants, one being Eliza Dunn, the missing cook, and the other being her maid. How times have changed, folks. A relatively affluent middle-class but otherwise fairly ordinary suburban couple would have full-time domestic staff living in to do the cooking and cleaning, despite Mrs. Todd not having a job herself. Small wonder people lived in such fear of destitution, and no wonder so many of us have grandparents who were in service when they were younger. There was a war coming, and that would change everything, but that's still some time in the future for these stories. The scene ends with Mrs. Todd pointing out that's number 88, and the car in the wide shot taking a long time to actually pull up to number 88 from the time of her mentioning it to actually stopping on another fully redressed street. As they enter the house, however, Poirot is concerned and confides to Hastings that never must Chief Inspector Japp hear I have investigated such a case, because he's still bothered about his reputation, even if his Poirot sense is tingling, and sometimes you just get the impression that Poirot knows more about what's going on already. Inside number 88, Poirot chats to Annie below stairs. Annie is played by Katie Murphy and gives a lovely performance in a charming little scene where Poirot is both charming and a bit of an old flatterer as he listens to her naive tales of white slavers and the cook's obsession with the stewed peaches which might have led to her astray, and discovers that the box was already packed before it was sent for, which proves significant to him as he demonstrates an impeccable logic that Annie quite obviously doesn't have, although for her a penny does finally drop, and it's a delight to see. He's always very polite and kind to anyone in domestic service, is our Poirot. It's as if he has an affinity for the underdog and really feels sympathy for their wretched lot in life, especially when such a life is made particularly wretched by their snotty employers who, but for the grace of, and so forth, could very well have been in domestic service themselves. You tend to notice that if you watch him a lot. The great and the good often get short shrift, but rarely the domestics. Well, not unless the domestic is just a villain pretending to be a domestic, of course. Outside the door, Mrs. Todd has been earwigging, feeling rather paranoid that sweet little Annie might be bad-mouthing her employer. As Poirot takes his leave of Annie and heads back upstairs, she scuttles away from the door and pretends to read her magazine, displaying all of her middle-class snobbery in a sparklingly played character moment which marks her out momentarily as a bit of a wrong-un with secrets to hide. We also learn that the banker's wife also has a banking lodger, and that the missing 90 grand mentioned earlier starts to get Monsieur Poirot's little grey cells tingling. Seeing as the banker and his clerk aren't due back for a while, Poirot and Hastings bugger off to the park for an hour, justifying all those extras we spotted on the common earlier, and Poirot points out that the clerk Simpson worked in the same office as the absconded clerk Davis, missing along with all that money since the previous Wednesday. The plot, as they say, is thickening. After their stroll and chat, they return to the house and meet Mr. Todd, Anthony Carrick, who is obviously a cad as he only makes himself a drink and doesn't offer to share his booze with either Captain Hastings or Poirot. So far so suburban, Agatha doesn't seem particularly smitten by the middle classes, or doctors for that matter. She really does seem to have it in for doctors if you read a lot of her works. But getting back to the plot, for the moment we are suspicious of these Todds, and as he guides them up the staircases towards Simpson the lodger's room, all we note from the relative comfort of his own hallway, there's no way he was going to climb all the way up there. The sinister soundtrack tells us that something is indeed afoot. On knocking, however, Simpson answers, and Poirot gets to meet him face to face, and surprise, surprise, it's that sinister, sweaty-looking fellow we saw packing that trunk right at the start of the programme, and so perhaps the Todds are simply horrible middle-class folk after all. So, in a roundabout way, Poirot interviews Simpson, and Simpson in return obfuscates, claiming to know nothing. As Poirot goes to depart in the best Columbo just one more thing tradition, he asks, "Tell me," and after a significant pause asks a seemingly innocent-sounding question about what a young gentleman gets up to in his free time. At this point, he gets in very close to Simpson, and we begin to wonder whether he understands English boundaries in this funny foreign way, and whilst his queries about amateur theatricals all seem rather throwaway, keep watching, because they will become very significant later. Meanwhile, night has fallen in Clapham, and as they are walking back across the bridge at night in a very expensive-looking night shoot, Poirot points out to Hastings that just because somebody doesn't offer to give you a drink doesn't make them a criminal, and that he is very interested in this case indeed. We then cut to Poirot in close-up in his office in an absolute fury as Mr. Todd has been in touch to tell him that his wife was out of line and that he should drop the case, and has tried to pay him off with a single guinea for his trouble. Poirot is livid and rants about this two-penny, half-penny case, as Poirot's slightly misspoken use of English is something of a character point, and his pride has been hurt. Swearing that he intends to get to the bottom of this, no matter what the cost, he asks Miss Lemon to place a notice that he has something that would be to her advantage, as Hastings corrects him to put it, in all of the newspapers. Miss Lemon dismisses the Times, thinking that a cook is unlikely to read such a publication, but Poirot sagely points out that someone who knows her may read the Times. Hastings, meanwhile, wants to pop over to Sandown races, a little moment that helps to underscore both Hastings' indolence and his love of gambling. This is the first of several Hastings' sure things that rarely turn out well and will become a bit of a running gag throughout their time together. Meanwhile, Poirot decides to pop to the City of London and meets up with a bank manager, Mr. Cameron, played by Richard Bebb, in the beautiful Art Deco interior of the bank. We will see far more of this kind of stuff as the series progresses, often one suspects in exactly the same filming location. Meanwhile, in the lovingly recreated location of the bank's interior, Chief Inspector Japp is interviewing staff about the missing 90 grand and is in conversation with the very same Simpson we saw earlier who worked with Davis and seems to suggest that the missing Davis never went to foreign places. In the middle of the interview, he spots Poirot coming down the stairs, pointing out to Japp that he recognises him from yesterday. Japp goes over to say hello, and as he turns, Poirot's face becomes a picture of mock surprise, even as it turns out that Japp knows that he's been reduced to finding missing domestics, which is the first example of the affectionate banter within the friendly relationship that exists between the two characters, which develops throughout the stories. Interestingly, at this time, Poirot seems to not be the pale, more refined figure we later see in high definition in later series. It could, of course, simply be down to the film stock being used at this time, but the show does have a very different look to it in those earlier series. There follows a bit of a montage as Poirot waits at home to hear from the missing cook. We see him at the window, close up on his telephone, still nothing, and Poirot seems bothered and distracted in his office. Time has passed and he hasn't had any response to his adverts or any word from Eliza, until a letter brightens him in which she announces that she's already got her legacy and is happily residing in Keswick, or Keswick, as Poirot amusingly puts it. And so Hastings and Poirot have a train to catch, and soon a steam train crosses the wide open spaces of the Lake District with a couple of extras in period hiking gear in the foreground, just to show it's not stock footage they're using. The chat on the train is all about the empty wasteland of this particular version of the countryside, which compares interestingly with the Sherlock Holmes view of the great outdoors, harbouring the worst of criminals several decades earlier. And Poirot is pondering upon bigger things in his enigmatic way. Then, in an almost comic sequence, the same feet we first saw of him are now unpleasantly standing in mud, and as Poirot and Hastings are troubled by sheep, we see Poirot as a veritable fish out of water in this dreadful great outdoors, preferring paintings to the harsh reality of the countryside and extolling the virtues of the good air of town. Arriving at the humble home of Fell Cottage, Poirot is less than impressed, even though the missing cook has been found. Frida Dowie, playing Eliza, is a simple and elderly soul, unlikely to have been the target of the white slave trade, but she has a quiet dignity in the fact that she is no longer a servant, and that this is her house. Her pride in the small sum of money and the house she inherited is all quite tragic, really. Although she is naive, we are not supposed to think she's a bit dim. She simply hoped for a better life and thought that her ship had come in. The story doesn't dwell upon the disappointments to come, although she does seem surprised that Mr. Crotchet did not forward on her a letter of explanation to Mrs. Todd like he promised to. There is a flashback. She was intercepted on her way home from her day off the previous Wednesday and taken to a cafe by this Mr. Crotchet, and where she was told of her legacy, this house and a small amount of money, by this scruffy-looking man claiming to be a lawyer and who had, bad guy disguise alert, a beard and glasses. I don't imagine someone with Eliza's background might have known he was particularly scruffy-looking, by the way, especially with such good news to impart, and she certainly failed to notice this was a disguised lodger running a bit of a red-headed League-style con on a naive spinster. One of the stipulations of the alleged last will and testament she's benefiting from is that she mustn't be a domestic, and because this is a greed con, he persuades her that she had to have left domestic service before we met, and as the penny drops, we're making a fortune here, this suddenly all seems so sad when we realise what he has persuaded her to do, pretty much give up her security to become complicit in a lie. Back in the present with Poirot, the fact that her possessions turned up wrapped in brown paper and not in her trunk becomes clearer to her. She assumed that Mrs. Todd was offended, but she would be if she'd not got her letter of explanation. The pace now quickens, leaving the no longer missing cook behind to find out the awful truth for herself. Poirot and Hastings make haste to return to London, and Poirot makes a hasty phone call to Inspector Japp from a phone box on Carlisle Station before dashing onto a train. We know this is supposed to be Carlisle Station thanks to a huge and probably wildly inaccurate sign filmed somewhere completely different, I'm sure, but no matter. As they travel back towards civilization, Poirot and Hastings have another chat as they sit in the relative comfort of first class, and we get the first proper mention of those little grey cells as the fiendish plot is explained to both Captain Hastings and those of us sitting at home. The earlier proximity is explained when Poirot reveals that he spotted a fleck of theatrical gum in Simpson's sideburns as he was talking to him, and because Hastings is sometimes so very dim, he slowly catches up with the fact that Simpson in disguise was pretending to be the lawyer. But finally he gets it, and yet another penny drops. We really are making a fortune here. Poirot, as he will, smiles knowingly in extreme close-up. Poirot knows. Back at 88 Prince Albert Road, Poirot arrives to find the police there and the whole household in a bit of a frenzy. When the door is answered, to prick his pomposity, he is not recognised by the uniformed officers, and we get one of those some French chap gags that permeate the entire series as his Belgian roots are misunderstood. An emerging Inspector Japp is not happy with what he believes to have been something of a wild goose chase, believing Simpson to be the bank clerk he claims to be, and not the notorious crook Poirot thinks that he is, although Mrs. Todd, berating Poirot through a downstairs window, is even more unhappy with him and gives him short shrift with exclamations of "You were paid off," and he is denied access to ask Annie his one vital question. However, not to be outwitted, he sneaks down the back stairs outside to talk to Annie through the window and extricates more details about the once missing cook's now missing box, and specifically about the label. And because she's not completely daft and actually rather sweet, Annie remembers what was written upon it and where it went, Twickenham Station, and we have been treated to another scene of Poirot being rather lovely to her again. And of course, we now know that Poirot knows what's going on, and when Poirot knows, the game is pretty much over. We head off to another exterior railway station location with all its Art Deco loveliness again, and Poirot replies to Hastings' question about the house in Keswick by suggesting that he'd be surprised if she was in more than a 6-month lease, which is so sad, and the only real acknowledgement of the miserable fraud committed upon Eliza Dunn. We are left to wonder about the consequences for her in the long run, although a good cook is a good cook, so hopefully she'll be alright in the end. Meanwhile, as they approach a window, Poirot explains that Simpson did all of this rather than buying a new trunk because he needed a respectable trunk to put the body in. Clang! Sadly, the trunk in question has been sent to Glasgow, and whilst the porter they talk to is sarcastic about the fact that it has been, Poirot flatters to deceive him, while Hastings is all, "Now see here, my good man," gittishness, and has to be shut up. However, they do manage to extract this supposition that the porter bets that the supposed owner of the trunk's going to Bolivia, because he noticed it written on the notes in the stack of cash he was brandishing when he paid. Danny Webb, playing the porter incidentally, is one of the select few guest actors to get to play more than one role in the Poirot TV series. He'd return as Superintendent Bill Garraway in Elephants Can Remember 24 years later, rather nicely bracketing the series with appearances in both the first and the last series of episodes. Back at Poirot's office, they are busily checking the newspapers for the week's sailings, those were the days, and Poirot has to point out to Hastings that Bolivia is a landlocked country, whilst Miss Lemon is wistful about such exotic names in an era when such travel to faraway places was little more than a dream for most people. Finding what they need, they must away to Southampton, but first they must pay a visit to Scotland Yard and explain to a bewildered and sceptical Inspector Japp about what's really been going on as he's been chasing round looking for the missing Clark Davis. In Japp's office he is still insistent that it is Davis whom they are after, until the phone rings explaining that the missing trunk has indeed been found in the Glasgow luggage office, and whilst Poirot implores them to open it, the forces of law and order still need a warrant, something expedited when Poirot exclaims that it might just have Davis's body in it. And, in the fine tradition yet to be established in the series, denouement, Poirot explains as the body is indeed found rather nastily folded inside the trunk as expected, and covered with a voiceover which transports us to Southampton docks, where Poirot and company arrive and board the SS Navonia, discovering to their chagrin that sailing's discontinued and Simpson is not aboard. However, another penny drops, hopefully not the one clutched firmly between our hero's buttocks, and it becomes apparent that he'll be trying to get aboard the Queen of Heaven, because he's off to Caracas in Venezuela, and that the word on the money spotted by the porter was Bolivar, their unit of currency, and not Bolivia after all. And with a bellow of "Simpson!" who, like an idiot, looks around, and another shout of "Stop that man!" which a pair of handy stewards dutifully do, Simpson is taken and gives our heroes the look of pure hatred of a man soon to be condemned to the gallows. And, as we think about one inevitable hanging, we cut to a picture being hung on Poirot's wall, with Poirot on directing duties and Miss Lemon wrangling the hammer to knock the nail in. Poirot has had Mr. Todd's cheque for 1 guinea framed, and, as he takes credit away from Miss Lemon, who was actually hanging it, points out that the cheque will serve as a reminder that little cases, such as the search for a missing domestic, became solving a notorious murder, and in close-up seems duly satisfied, and even the building they are all supposedly inside gets a credit at the end. And there you have it, the first episode of Agatha Christie's Poirot TV series, Accept No Imitations, which ran for 70 episodes over the following half-century and brought life into all of the adventures featuring this character written by Agatha Christie herself and featuring a consistent main cast, which is no small achievement in this day and age. Other Christie adaptations have come along since, and they too have their fans and are of their time, but for me, this is the Poirot that I want, and they made an excellent job of it.
Many thanks to Mr. Martin.
Yes, thank you, Martin. I have got a huge box set of Poirot. I really must watch some more.
But you do watch them, don't you?
I do, but I usually watch them more on ITV3 when they're being repeated, despite the fact I've got them sitting on the floor.
It's that thing of you've got the entire set.
Yeah, but if it's on the telly, you've got to watch it.
But you watch it when it's on the telly.
Yeah.
Weird, isn't it?
It is.
Right. New voices, ahoy.
Yes.
Brilliant. Yes. Bob Fischer and Andrew T. Smith are here
to look at Last of the Summer Wine.
Hey up everyone, I'm Andrew T. Smith.
Hello, it's Bob Fischer here.
And together we are...
The Summer Winos. Are we meant to do that together in unison, in
Possibly,
harmony?
But it's not as if we've rehearsed this.
Oh, come on, should we try it?
Together we are the Summer Winos.
I think it was better just doing it separately.
Yeah, probably.
Let's never, ever, ever try to do that again. So delighted to be on Round the Archives. Thanks for having us, so to speak.
One of the few that will.
We should talk a little bit about Summer Winos, really. This is our quest to watch all of Last of the Summer Wine in order. So that would be 295 episodes, Drew.
Yep, 295 episodes.
Yeah.
What were we thinking?
I know. It's been lovely, though.
It has been. And Summer Winos is also, it's not just us watching these and keeping it to ourselves. Yeah. It's a blog that has become a live show now as well.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how that happened. Should we talk a little bit about how the blog actually started? Because I think the genesis of this was genuinely when the final episode of Last of the Summer Wine was broadcast.
Yeah, Bob and I have been friends for far too long now.
But we're sick of each other.
We knew we had this liking for summer wine in common. Last of the Summer Wine, in case anyone hadn't picked up on that.
Yeah.
And so when...
Important to pander to people that might not be aware of the full title of the programme.
By the time the last episode of the series aired, we both kind of drifted away from the programme, dipping in here and there every now and then. But we decided we'd get together and make a day of it.
Yeah, we did. It was a bank holiday weekend, I think. It was August 2010. So we got together in my front room.
A few drinks.
Did have a few drinks. There was probably biscuits involved. I know we made a note of what kind of biscuit we were eating because we weren't aware of the momentous historical occasion that it was going to prove to be.
No, but somewhere in our archives there is video evidence of this as well that we need to dig out at some point.
We were so filled with our own sense of self-importance. We actually filmed ourselves watching the final episode of Last of the Summer Wine.
It's our version of the Unearthly Child run-through, isn't it?
It is. It's the pilot, the unscreened pilot. I mean, if I had to put money on it, I would say chocolate digestives.
Probably.
But yeah, as we watched that last episode with no intention of going any further, I don't think.
No.
We just did it because it would be nice to get together and watch it. And then at the end of it, I think we're in danger of repeating a big chunk of our live show
Yeah,
here.
we'll do the brief version.
At the end, as the credits rolled on that final episode of Last of the Summer Wine, you did genuinely turn to me and ask a question.
Yeah, a momentous, life-changing question,
A
some
question
might
that
say.
is possible to recreate. We are doing the live show
Yeah,
here.
we will,
Let's stop
go on.
doing that. No, the question.
Should we watch all of Last of the Summer Wine in order?
Yeah, all right.
And then we did.
And then we did. We started, and I think it's fair to say we've got more ambitious as we've gone along, isn't it? Because when you read the early blog entries that we did, I think, do we start in 2011? The actual blogging
Yeah, I
started in
think so,
2011, I think. And when you read those early entries, they're pretty perfunctory.
Yeah, and originally, because we didn't think, or I didn't think that Last of the Summer Wine would sustain a whole blog of its own. It was me and a combination of writing on my own and a couple of different people watching things in order. So in addition to Last of the Summer Wine, there was Coronation Street. That was never going to happen.
You were going to watch all of Last of the Summer Wine and all of Coronation Street.
And the Pirates of the Caribbean. Which there is a connection, we found out later on. There is a connection between
there is
Pirates of the
actually.
Caribbean.
Do you know what? I
and
should
Summer
make a note of that because we will undoubtedly completely forget to come back to that if I don't. But there is, absolutely, yeah.
But far from not having much to say about Last of the Summer Wine, the more we started to write these entries, the bigger and longer and more detailed and more insane they became. Until not that far into the experiment, we just decided to let's just make Summer Wine as its own thing, its own blog.
Because I think we
going.
realised, didn't we, that there were elements of social history involved here. We realised that quite early on. When you've got a sitcom that ran for 37 years across quite a period of British history that changes a lot.
Absolutely,
So,
yeah.
you know, it's 1973 to 2010. You know, those two eras of British history are virtually unrecognisable
And
from each
specifically,
other.
it's 1973 Yorkshire to 2010 Yorkshire.
It's not swinging London.
Exactly, yeah. It's its own pocket universe.
Yeah, it is, yeah. So it was quite early we started to spot things like the soot on the buildings in Holmfirth in 1973. All of the buildings are black,
Yeah.
which I'd completely forgot that as an element of my childhood, but because everybody had a coal fire in 1973, there was just soot and filth everywhere.
Holmfirth is quite frankly horrible in those early episodes.
It's not now, before anybody from Holmfirth comes
No,
to get
don't
us.
another letter.
It's truly beautiful now. But I think we've mentioned this, haven't we? In fact, bravely, we mentioned this at a live performance in Holmfirth. and there was a little rumble. But Holmfirth was chosen because it was a bit down on its luck in 1973.
I always forget the name of the documentary it was featured in.
It's a Barry Tuck documentary, isn't
Yeah,
it?
looking at the working men's club scene specifically in Holmfirth.
Yeah.
And it is just such a grim piece of television.
Yeah.
Of these men, you know, slogging their guts out during the week or being unemployed during the week.
Yeah.
And then going down the social club for a rather ratty looking striptease act as their entertainment. And someone at the BBC saw this and thought, that's our sitcom.
Yeah,
or that's at least that's the setting for our sitcom.
But it's interesting watching the attitudes as well in those early episodes, and you've got episodes that deal with the nature of faith. You know, Christian faith is mentioned quite a lot, and it's quite clear in those early episodes that Blaymeyer, who is the original third man pre-Foggy,
Yeah, Michael Bates being brilliant as he always
he's
is.
superb, but he's quite he's a committed Christian in those early episodes, but it isn't an integral part of his character at all. It's just there.
No.
And it's made reference to quite a lot. And I don't think that would happen
He's typical
anymore.
Church of England.
Yeah, he is.
He's culturally Christian.
Yeah.
It's just taken as fact. That's what he is.
And I don't think that would happen anymore. You couldn't do a Christian character in a 2019 sitcom
And not have it
without
be the thing that they're about. Yeah.
So it's showing little things like that about how we've changed over the last 45, 46 years that really got to us. And I think as the blog has gone on, like, our entries have become more and more verbose. Our reviews of every episode have become more and more verbose because we've become more interested in picking up on and documenting stuff like that.
Yeah, I can't remember what the record is, but I think we wrote about 35,000 words on the first television movie.
Yeah, no, there are some long bits of writing on there. That is absolutely true. So that's how it started, and that's how it's rumbled on over the last. Good God, it's 8 years. So what we've done. I did find one of the early entries I was spotted last week, and I mentioned in it that I'm 39 and I'm 47 this year.
And I'm still not 39, I'm quite happy to say.
You were a child when we started doing this. How old were you in 2011?
Count backwards.
Come on, work this out.
I would have been, hang on, 1,
Oh, for
2.
crying out loud. He actually got his fingers out here, listeners.
I was young. I was young.
All right. Were you 24?
Yeah.
You 25 is appalling. We should talk a little bit, I think, about the appeal of Last of the Summer Wine to us. I mean, even before we started doing this. What was it for you? What was it about Last of the Summer Wine that spoke to you as a kid? Because, as you know, as we talk about in the live show, it wasn't particularly a sitcom that was geared towards a child audience, and yet we both fell in love with it as kids.
No, I think it definitely wasn't geared towards that audience when it started, but I suppose by the time I got to it, which is the early 90s, when Foggy comes back for the second time, or comes back for the first time, for his second stint, it had become broader, and Bill Owen's combo had ended his pixie phase. I think he was this sort of the Chaplin-esque kind of character, this trampy little figure who did silly things.
He's kind of childlike himself, isn't he?
Yeah, and each week involved, slapstick and stunts, and there were characters like Eli, who was this sort of Mr. Magoo kind of character who couldn't see anything, back every week doing a similar kind of gag. And I think to a kid, it's that kind of thing that first grabs you, or at least it did to me.
Yeah.
And I could also recognise the world in which it was set. I know Edie's ladies' circle, where they're all drinking the cups of tea in her house and moaning about the men in their lives, was definitely something that I latched onto as being the same as when my grandmother's sisters would turn up into her bungalow, and they'd all catch up and sitting there with their little china cups and their biscuits. And it was a world that you didn't see represented in many other places, I think.
Especially not by the 1990s.
No. The hip, cool 1990s, colourful 1990s.
Yeah. It was the same for me, I think, in the 80s. I mean, my first memory of watching it is in certainly the very early 80s, and it was the first Foggy era, so Foggy, Compo and Clegg in that era. And it definitely reminded me of me and my dad being out in the countryside, and that kind of sort of pragmatic northern attitude towards the countryside, where you're not necessarily standing on at the edge of a glorious vista, being consumed by the majesty of nature. You're picking up blades of grass and making farty noises by blowing into them. It was that attitude to being out in the countryside that I saw in Last of the Summer Wine. But I also the dialogue as well also really appealed to me as a kid. Because again, it's that northern thing, and I don't think I can't think of another program on TV where people would tell each other to bog off, which was a popular turn of phrase at my school. So that kind of northern bluntness, I think, really got to me. But it was a family thing as well, like you say about your dad, and Edie's circle reminding you of your family.
Yeah.
For me, it was like a family experience of watching it. It was definitely something that me and my parents would all watch, and if my gran was around, she would watch it as well, and we'd all enjoy it together. And I never thought for a second, it's about old people. That never occurred to me.
No. Older people, perhaps that's because I was a kid, but it wasn't about decrepit old people or people who were behaving in a stereotypically pensionerish manner.
No, they're funny old people. They've got a zest for life, and they're doing stuff that as a kid you'd want to do.
They're on a constant summer holiday.
Yeah.
That's those long summer weeks where you fill your time.
Yeah.
When you're not having to go to school and you don't have this routine. They've been stripped of their routine as well because they're all either redundant or retired or they've never worked. Mostly redundant, really. They're people who've been abandoned, at least in those early years.
Yeah.
Craig has been let go from the co-op, and Blaymeyer is out of the army.
Yeah. Foggy's out of the army.
Foggy's out of the army, yeah.
And Compo hasn't worked for over 30 years.
Yeah, and even later on with Frank Thornton as Truly, he's a policeman who now doesn't have anything to police.
Yeah.
So he's got to fill that gap somehow. And I think it is childlike in that sense. It's whiling away time.
You're right. I'd never thought about that summer holidays thing, but you're absolutely right. It's and I get like it would be hard to explain to like a child of 2019. I think how we struggle to fill our time in the summer holidays, pre-internet, pre-smartphone, pre-computer games, pre-consoles. You know, you had six. They seem to go on forever. 6 weeks now just goes like that. It's nothing.
Yeah.
But 6 weeks of doing nothing essentially in the summer holidays, of having to find stuff to do every day. And it was the era when, you know, you would take up hobbies in your summer holidays, and it would be the same kind of hobbies that the people in Last of Summer Wine,
like building a treehouse or fannying about in a river or
building a little cart and rolling it down a hill.
Yeah.
It's all of that, I think. What's really been nice about doing the Summer Winos quest is how it's picked up a community, I think, as it's gone along, hasn't it?
Yeah, it definitely has. Even very early on, we started getting regular commenters, people who would, you know, join us in watching it in order every time we posted.
Yeah.
And often the comments that they posted pointed us in directions we hadn't thought of before, or they spotted references to cultural things that we hadn't picked up on, things like that.
And we've kind of picked up a couple of people involved with the programme as well, which has been a lovely surprise. I mean, we did start to interview people, didn't we? We spoke to Stuart Fell.
Yeah, we started reaching out to people who we could get hold of.
So Stuart Fell was Bill Owen's stuntman, who was great and told us some lovely stories.
Yeah, lovely man.
Juliet Kaplan, who played Pearl, we contacted, so just through her website.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was through her website, and we spoke on Skype.
Yeah.
Only woman in the world capable of blowing cigarette smoke down a Skype connection. But she is wonderful and has incredible, brilliant stories to share.
And I think like a real game changer for us. I mean, Stuart and Julia were lovely and brilliant, but I think a real game changer for us was making friends with Jonathan Lindsley, who played Crusher in the 1980s.
Yeah,
he was Ivy's nephew in the cafe. It's big, sort of hulking biker figure.
Yeah, we noticed that he'd started to post comments on different social media platforms that we were going to plug our own blog. We noticed that he was just posting as himself, answering fans' questions, you know, giving a lot back to the fans, actually.
Totally.
And it was also very apparent that he loved the show.
Yeah.
You know, it's clearly been a highlight for him. And
he's a genuine fan, isn't he?
Yeah.
Himself.
He was a fan before it began, fan during, and it's clearly something he's very, very fond of, that time in his life. So we reached out to him and said, would you mind, you know, having a quick chat with us for the blog? And we conducted a mammoth interview.
It was a couple
Jonathan.
of hours, wasn't it?
Yeah, he has such great stories to tell.
Yeah.
Because he's one of those links back to people like Joe Gladwin. He told us loads about Joe Gladwin, who played Wally Batty, Nora's henpecked husband.
Yeah.
You know, stories that would be otherwise lost to the ages because, you know, where is Joe Gladwin's biography? It does not exist.
That's one of the loveliest things about doing this is finding out stuff like that. Because, like you say, if you Google Joe Gladwin, you'll find out, you know, a decent amount about his TV career. But that only started in the late 1950s. By which point Joe was, you know, he was over 50 himself then. But it was Jonathan that told us about sitting on the bus to locations next to Joe Gladwin, and Joe, who would have been, you know, in his late 70s at that point, told Jonathan all about his early life, about running away from home to join a travelling variety show. He stole his father's coal-powered tractor, was it?
Yeah, and on the variety circuit, he was billed as the world's strongest man.
He come on in a leotard.
Yes, he come on in a leotard, tried to lift weights and collapse and faint and be carried out by doctors. And then at the
It's
end
in the
of the night,
1920s, 1930s.
proper showmanship.
It is.
And then at the end of the evening's entertainment, when the audience filed out of the theatre, there'd be an ambulance there, and Joe would be being loaded into the ambulance. Just as one last gag, which is just brilliant.
But this stuff isn't written down anywhere.
No.
If you Google for Joe Gladwin, you won't find any of this. At some point, I would really like the pair of us to get together and work on something substantial about Joe and his life. I'd love to write Joe's biography.
Yeah, we should definitely try tracking down more people who knew him, even family members, perhaps.
Yeah. Roy Clark?
Roy Clark, yes. The spectre of Roy Clark loomed over us for a long time, because he is such a legendary figure in British comedy, I think, and he's someone we admire so much.
Yeah.
And we were reluctant to get in touch with him.
We talked about this for years, hadn't we? About do we tell Roy Clark? You know, if anybody is unaware, the guy who wrote all 295 episodes of Last of the Summer Wine and Open All Hours and Keeping Up Appearances
And still open all hours.
Yeah.
He's still
This is
writing
right.
a primetime BBC sitcom. The man's 87, is he?
Yeah, 88 possibly.
Either way,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
you know, it's impressive.
And for years we thought, well, do we tell him about Summer Winos? Because, quite frankly, he might not like it.
Yes.
He might say, who are these two northeastern pillocks picking apart my TV scripts? Right of they? And I think he would have been entirely justified in saying that. But we were given... We were given his home address, weren't
Yes, in a brown envelope under a table in a gloomy backstreet cafe.
we? And how long did we sit on it? I think it was quite a long time.
It was probably about a year, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
And we toyed with it. Because if he'd said, stop doing this, we would have had to.
Yeah,
I
I
wouldn't
think
have
so,
wanted to
yeah.
do this against the wishes of Roy Clark. But we finally plucked up the courage and wrote him a letter. And I think I was at work. I was on the radio the following... it was only a couple of days after we sent it. I was on the radio. And you texted me and said, check your email. I can't. I'm on the radio. Just tell me.
Yeah, because I was in London with work at the time,
Oh,
having
yeah.
a pretty miserable day, and then
Right.
Roy Clark's name shows up in the inbox.
Well, how did you feel when you were about to open that email?
I can't remember what his subject line was. I can't
Leave
remember.
me alone.
It's what we were expecting.
Yes, I put a cliffhanger in there.
Yes. What will Roy Clark say?
Well, you'll have to come back next time to find out.
Yes.
Because Bob and Andrew's piece will continue.
Yes, in episode 33.
Now, we should just mention a few things to do with them.
Yes.
Bob may be heard on BBC Teas of an evening
Yes,
on the radio.
Yes, which can be listened to on the iPlayer.
Yes, and I sometimes do, and sometimes
Yes.
I send in silly messages that get
Yes,
read out.
Yes, and I think he and his sort of producer are quite surprised sometimes. Why is somebody in Dorset listening to you?
Martin even got his poem about Cyril Schaps
He
read
did.
out the other
It's
night.
a very nice poem. You should listen to that one if nothing else.
Bob's also got a book out, Whiffle Lever to Full, which I've got in my hand here,
Yes.
which is about his encounters with science fiction fandom,
Yes.
from Doctor Who, Blake Seven, Discworld,
Yeah.
Star Wars, Star Trek, Robin of Sherwood, Red Dwarf.
Everything.
Because he did come down here and have a water pistol fight.
He did apparently. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ah,
He did.
but the Summer Winos tour, which is their live show, the tour starts on the 27th of February in Arnold.
Okay.
I hope Arnold knows about this. The tour actually runs all the way into July, so
Yes.
just go to their website and have a look. But there is one on the 24th of March at the Museum of Comedy in London.
Yes.
Sadly, they're not sort of coming down this way.
No. Come down this way and see us, boys.
But I'd suggest the Pool Lighthouse.
Yep.
It
Yeah.
might be worth.
Or the Tivoli at Wimbledon.
Yeah, which does comedy
They
stuff
both
on
do
a
comedy
Thursday,
stuff,
don't they?
Yes. Yes.
But yes, as I said, they will be back. So find out what happens next.
Yes.
Now Paul and Nick
Yes.
return,
To look at another comedy programme,
which is...
Maggie and Her.
Someday soon, I'll find who I'm looking for, so watch that moon. You know what he's up there for, so I'll keep on trying, and I'll be flying. Watch this space, see my face someday very soon. Oh yeah, someday very soon.
Look at that near the door.
No, up here, up here, up here, up here.
Oh, Lord, come get your knickers in the tree.
Hello, listeners. It's me, Paul the Shy Yeti, otherwise known as Paul Chandler. I'm here with Nick Goodman.
The not so shy human being.
Yes. This time on Round the Archives, we're going to be discussing a show called Maggie and Her.
Ah, yes.
Yes, it's with Julia Mackenzie and Irene Handel. Now, I've watched the whole of the first series, and I really enjoyed it. But I was watching it, and I thought it would be fun to discuss the show a little bit with Nick, because you remember it.
I remember it first time. I remember the first series. I don't remember the second. I didn't realise there was a second series.
Yeah.
But the thing is, Friday nights in early '78 were quite busy because I had, as you obviously you know, with the Magnet Editor, I had a Friday night series called Look Again, Mr. Payne, which is about an undersea water explorer, and I used to lock myself in the loo and do the episodes. And I used to come when I used to emerge. Maggie and Her was on, and I remember the music. I couldn't sing it to you, but I think it was a sort of feminine kind of wistful sort of tune. And there was a bit at the halfway through where Irene Handel goes, "Oh yeah," was it? And but I used to I had a crush on Judy. I had a crush on loads of people. Julia Mackenzie was as my older woman crush back then. So it was very easy viewing from that point of view, and I think it was probably the first thing I ever really saw with Irene Handel in.
Yeah, there's
You Metal Mickey?
This is before Metal Mickey.
Yeah, I know, but...
That's Ali. The voice didn't come from the sky. Yeah, the first series is 7 episodes, but the DVD from Network has the pilot, which is from '76.
I knew nothing about
that's called Poppy and Her, rather than Maggie.
They obviously rechristened her Maggie.
I have watched, and then the second series is 6 episodes, and that was from April '79 till May '79. Now we were. Kind of decided we're going to watch the first episode of each series. The first episode we're going to watch is called The Naughty Window Cleaner.
Whoa. Which is a 70s title, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think these episodes have the advert breaks in, so we're going to stop and
Network.
Yeah, we're going to stop and discuss between in the advert breaks. So we'll be back soon.
Bye.
So we've watched the first part of The Naughty Window Cleaner, whatever it's called. The Naughty Window Cleaner, yes, I got it right.
A.K.A. Bernard Holly, who Axon Man from for Claws of Axos and Two of the Cybermen, and who Ali and I see at the Royal Theatrical thing. But yes, I enjoyed that. Irene Handel's so funny, and Julia Mackenzie so sexy. So you can't really go wrong.
I know when I was watching it, it's not necessarily always in this episode, but having seen the first season, at times it does remind me a bit of a female version of Steptoe and Son.
Indeed, yes.
And sometimes, even to the point where sometimes I think, they're treating Irene Handel's character a bit sort of, sort of indelicately. She's
I do remember that actually.
Yeah, in the same way as sometimes they did on Steptoe and Son.
I remember the title sequence with alarming accuracy. I remember those little kind of things, And the bit of the filmed insert at the end.
It's a shame, really, because this is the only episode that Bernard Holly is in, and I think probably they didn't want her to be too tied down to having a regular boyfriend, and because
I get the feeling the premise of the series is she can't really
settle with
a chap because she's got this kind of neighbour from. I must admit the hoarding aspect of the Mrs. P character is interesting because. We have a hoarder upstairs.
Yeah.
She's nothing like Irene. She's much less intrusive, but she is a massive hoarder. So I think that's a sort of old lady type thing.
There's. Do you wonder how much extra, whether it's all scripted or whether it's because sometimes they look like they're going to court.
There is such a wicked twinkle in Irene Handel's eye when she's. I've forgotten what a good actress she is. And also Sylvia, the mighty Sylvia Coleridge, who a year later turned up in Fishnets on Blake 7 as the croupier in Gambit,
and she was in. Seeds of Doom?
Yes, she was. She had a wonderful turn in Seeds of Doom.
Yeah.
As Emilia Ducar.
Again, I think
wonderful character actresses.
I think she's only in this. I mean, most episodes got a special guest or sort of. They are really. I'm trying to think. There's probably is. I think there's actually somewhere in the middle of the season there might almost be a sort of almost like a story arc where a character does appear. She maybe does have a boyfriend that lasts a couple of episodes.
I do remember a fella knocking around for a few episodes.
Yeah, but they don't last long.
No, it's a nice little series. It's one of those series where, although it ticks all the boxes, you do get frustrated that she can't. Be happy, but then there'd be no series if she was. So, it's a lovely little show.
And you're always sort of waiting to see what Irene Handel was going to do this episode.
Poor blimey! As I say, I just wish I was Bernard Holly.
Let's see what happens next.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon.
There nearly half an hour. I wonder if that little devil isn't up to something after all. I wouldn't put it past her.
And then there's the things your mum tells you when you're little, and when you grow up you realise they're not true at all. Like I always believed my mum when she told me enough is enough. Hang on.
So we finished our first episode.
Yeah.
And,
good fun.
Now, just to give a brief sort of overview of the plot of the first episode, the naughty window cleaner is played by Bernard Holly, and there's lots of sort of teasing where they think something's going on. So Bernard Holly and Julie Mackenzie sort of play up to it, and there's lots of sort of outrage from sort of outrage from Mrs. P and the various other ladies in the house.
One of which was a pre-EastEnders Anna Wing, who's kind of dressed, tarted up to the nines, you know, and totally kind of different from her EastEnders character.
Yeah, I can't remember how often the other ladies appear. I don't think it's that often, if at all. But you know, there's a lot of silliness, and you can imagine it being on the stage. It's quite the acting's all quite sort of like almost like farce, but
they're very good actors in that.
Yeah.
I can see why, you know, true, because I remember, as I say, when I'd done my little series on Friday nights, I used to come out, and I think I'd either missed Mind Your Language or something else, and but I definitely used to watch this.
Yeah, I bought it quite on a whim. I think, you know how you're sort of wandering around Amazon and other things pop up, and I think the box set of this was something ridiculous, like under a £5 or something. It wasn't expensive anyway, and I just sort of thought, Irene Handel, and I've sort of,
Julie Mackenzie.
No, I didn't think about it like that. I don't know what. I've also bought For the Love of Ada recently, which I think you also have. Did you say?
Well, no. I mean, literally, I don't. It was on about 70, so I don't remember it. But we watched. It's on Talking Pictures.
Oh, right, yes.
They're re-showing it.
Yeah, I bought that.
And I'd only seen I saw a bit of it the other day.
Yeah, I'm hoping for plenty of Irene.
I think. I get the feeling this is. I suppose probably biased because I remember it, but I get the feeling this is a bit more my cup of tea.
Yeah, it's. Well, I mean, sometimes you watch these things and the first episode's good and the rest isn't so good. But I enjoyed every episode I've watched of this, which I watched the first series. But it was
a very watchable, likeable show.
Yeah.
There is a steptoe character dynamic there.
Yeah. So.
Although it's not quite as arch and scheming as it's scheming in the it's not quite as abrasive as Steptoe.
Mrs. P reminds me, although she predates Lizzie Birdsworth in Prisoner Cell Block H, in that she gets her words all muddled up and there
were times when Irene handled Mrs. P's almost Stanley Unwin, her own language.
Well, I think we'll watch the first episode of the second series, and
splendid.
I hope this will be enjoyable as well. So we watched the first half of the first episode of series 2, which is called Holiday for Two. Yes. Which I realise I have seen this one as well, and there's some good bits to come up in the second bit, and then it's all about Maggie wanting to go on holiday, and Mrs. P kind of, well, she doesn't do anything subtly, so she's being quite passive aggressive that she'd like to go, but okay, it's fine if you don't want me to come.
Notable in this episode is John Cain. Of Tommy from Planet of the Spiders fame.
Oh, aren't you fleshy?
Fleshy, yeah.
I bet he's good in bed.
Next time I watch Planet of the Spiders, I will see it in a completely different light.
So I love the way that a little, a little line like "Oh no" with Irene Handel is "Oh no!"
Throws the head in the other direction.
It's like,
and she can be quite big and still be subtle. It's quite impressive bit of work. But the woman who plays Maggie's friend in this looks pretty darn familiar. I'm trying to place who it is, and
I feel like she's been in the first series as well. She might be a sort of returning character.
I think she's a sort of TV stalwart at the time. I just go, oh.
You said when we were watching it, another set.
Yeah.
But because you got to see them at the school, which you see them at the school quite. So I was, my heartbeat didn't race so much because I've seen the school before, but yeah.
Oh well, no, I did. My heartbeat didn't.
I'm being sarcastic.
And any heartbeat raising is entirely Jude Mackenzie's fault. But no, with. I think it's because I suppose we've gone from the first episode of the first series to the second episode of the last series. In my head, I thought, oh right, they've actually afforded another set now. But obviously, what a nasty bunch of kids.
Oh, they're
sort of.
They're all about 25 as well.
Yes, exactly. Half of them.
And the headmistress is Carmen Silvera.
Oh yes, looking very prim and proper as only Carmen Silvera could.
If Irene Handel got to meet her, she'd probably, "Oh, you stupid woman!"
Yeah. So it's shaping up quite nicely.
Yeah. So yes, at the moment, because her first offer of a holiday gets cancelled, she's desperate to kind of find a replacement holiday, which isn't either with her boss.
Well, I would offer to go with her, but I was 10 when this episode went down, so that's a bit dodgy.
I think there's a scene coming up which I won't. Well,
I think the kids at the school would have been old enough to have.
There's a scene I'm looking forward to discussing. If it's the episode I'm thinking of, this show never fails to sort of make you kind of chin drop. Oh my goodness, I can't believe what they're doing now. So let's go on to the the second part of this episode.
And I will get a safety net for my chin.
Yes, please do. We're back again.
Hello.
We watched the last
bit, and
yes.
I have seen it before.
That one. Yeah.
I remember Johnny Kane saying, "God, this is embarrassing." Every 5 minutes. I thought there was going to be a twist. I thought he was going to end up being gay.
Yeah.
But no, great fun.
Irene Handel shows up in a full skiing costume.
Yes, I mean, what a game old bird. You know, you've got to admire her. And
with bloomers.
But yeah, I think I'd prefer to see Julie Mackenzie in her bloomers.
They ended up on location at the end of the
yes.
episode.
I mean, it was obviously filmed in some god awful day in sort of November or something. But then it was supposed to look awful. But also there was Christopher Owen from Meglos, the Earthling in Meglos, without his pricks on,
as it were. I get why you say that.
Yes. And I completely forgot to look out for that lady who was in the first part.
Who it
was? Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she's in other episodes, but.
But no, it's a really nice show.
Yeah, I've still got another 5 episodes to watch for that season. But
and also of note, John Kane's, because of course he's written for many comedy shows, written for many drama shows, and he's actually, because it's I remember him in Doctor on the Go, but many years ago, but. Seeing him in this, you can see he's a very good actor as well as a very good writer, because the comic timing with him and Julia Mackenzie is very impressive.
You can almost imagine that you could see the Terry Scott.
Yes,
considering he wrote lines for Terry Scott, you could imagine him playing those lines.
Oh yes,
that was almost the sort
and he even looks like Terry Scott in some shots.
Yeah,
but no, it's there's some good talent on display.
Yeah, so listeners, I think we definitely both recommend giving Maggie and Her a go. It's a good laugh. It's quite over the top, but I think it'd be very difficult to sit there and not crack a smile. It's a good one, and it's out there in Amazon.
Available now from all good shops. What's left of them
out there in the Amazon. I don't know if it'll be in any stores. Probably not anymore.
Probably the last HMV is in the Amazon.
But yes, it's out there. And it's worth watching. So give it a go. And thanks, Nick, for watching it with me.
It's been a pleasure.
And, we'll hand back to Troby and Lisa.
Yay. Bye
Yeah. How much longer is that window cleaner going to be? Has he been in your bedroom?
That's my business.
Well, I hope you'll soon be finished with him.
Well, I don't know. He might be hours yet.
Vilton.
I think they're rather amusing, don't you, George? These solemn little snoopers.
Geisha Gold.
Nosy Parker.
Concubine.
Lady Hitler.
What are you laughing at?
I've never seen anything like it. No one would ever think you two were neighbours. Mother and daughter, more like. Mother and only daughter at that.
Thank you to Paul and Nick.
Yes, thank you, boys. Yet again, another interesting article.
And again, they will return in the future.
In the future, yes, lots of ideas bubbling up.
Yes, indeed. Now we're already coming to the end of the episode.
We are,
and we haven't done anything yet,
no,
have
haven't,
we?
But do something.
We've been in the fortunate situation of
Yes.
having so much stuff from other people.
Yes, that we're able to sort of step back a little bit.
But with the passing of Windsor Davies,
Yes.
We had to do
Yes.
It Ain't Our Fault Mum,
Of course
didn't we?
we did, yes.
So Warren will join us on the sofa in a minute, and we'll look at the final two episodes. But before that happens, we'll just do the wrap up and say thank you to everyone for their help, and thank you to everyone for listening.
Yes.
And 33 is not far away.
No, it's not. It's probably 75% done, isn't it?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not saying too much yet.
Yeah.
So we'll say goodbye now, but after the end title music, do hang around as we've got one of our bonus things.
Yes.
Because we felt we ought to talk a bit about Round the Horne.
Yes, as we're coming up to the 50th anniversary or commemoration of the passing of Kenneth Horne.
Indeed.
On the 14th of February.
It's an influential show on us.
It is very much so.
But in the meantime, we're going to 8.5 Hot Mum.
Yes.
And then we'll run the end credits and we'll see you again.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
In half an hour on BBC One, there's Comedy with the Concert Party in It Ain't Half Hot Mum. Tonight's story concerns the men's efforts to persuade their Sergeant Major to apply for a commission. That's at 7:45.
Meet the gang, cause the boys are here, the boys to entertain you. With music and laughter to help you on your way, to raising the rafters with a hey, hey, hey. With songs and sketches and jokes old and new. With us about you won't feel blue, so meet the gang, cause the boys are here, the boys to entertain you. B-O-B-O-Y-S, boys to entertain you.
Good afternoon, Warren.
Hello, lovely boy.
Good afternoon, Warren.
Hello, Lisa. You got a lovely pair of shoulders.
Show 'em off, show 'em off.
Don't do accents.
Okay. We have just watched the penultimate episode of 8.5 Hot Mum.
Yes, in tribute to Windsor Davies.
Yes, and we will watch the final episode after we've chatted about this one.
This one, yeah.
But how much have you seen of this last season, Warren?
I've only recently seen part of the last episode.
Yeah.
But I remember this from original transmission.
Right. Because it's 1981, August 1981 this is.
So I'd have been 11.
Yeah, and I would have been 13, which is frightening.
Yes.
You wouldn't have been, would you?
No, I was 9.
Yeah. Did you watch them at the time?
I honestly can't remember.
Yeah.
I know I've seen it, but I don't know if I've seen it more recently. It depends to be honest, what day was it?
Thursday.
Right, so Coronation Street would have been on. So possibly.
Yeah. This was on at 8:30 after Citizen Smith.
Yeah, so it might have done. It's a long time ago, I couldn't tell you for sure.
I remember the impact.
Yeah.
I do remember the impact and the sadness.
But these last two episodes, I think, it's what I often say about sort of Perry and Croft series, is that they're very good when they have to challenge their own format. So Dad's Army never really gets a final episode. No. But this is very much everything's coming to an end.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens in the last episode of Heidi High as well, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
And there's a lot in this that isn't comedy, really, is there? It's all relationship drama isn't it?
Very much relationship. Lofty and Sergeant Major especially, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the setup is that Lofty doesn't get his injections to go home, so he has to stay at the camp.
Yes.
And so they have to do what they think is their final farewell to him there. And you said, Warren, that the Sergeant Major, you can see he's actually human at this point.
Yeah.
Because you wrote us a lovely tribute about Windsor Davies that went on our blog a few weeks ago. But I do like that two-hander scene between Windsor Davies and Don Estelle.
Yeah.
Because it sort of veers between sort of quite sentimental,
being uncomfortable to watch.
And then
peppered with humour,
and then you get that wonderful bit where the Sergeant Major tells Lofty that if he's the only one here in camp,
he should carry on.
He's got to keep the standards up and inspect himself every morning.
Yes. And then it suddenly dawns on him what he's just said, and he just does a little look, Windsor Davies, doesn't he?
And he's got a sort of medium close up. The camera's gone from a sort of wider shot to a close up on it because they know it's a funny line anyway. You can sort of see how the camera script works, but the audience adds something to it, because Windsor's reacting to the studio audience's response.
He just stretches that little bit, doesn't he?
And he does it, that little twitch thing he does with his mouth,
Yeah.
you know, that he said something a bit rude, and that gets an extra laugh.
And the pitch goes higher, doesn't it? Yeah.
So I think that's a great example of how sort of these types of comedies work with a studio audience.
Yeah.
Because you've had the opening scene as well, where they do the girls' routine.
Yes.
Dames.
Yeah.
And that was almost direct. Well, as you said at the time, this is for the audience, isn't it? It's
Well,
almost a warm-up,
Lofty is
isn't it?
looking straight down the camera lens for the
Mm-hmm.
first bit. But they're really playing it for the studio audience. And
Because they have to wait for the applause to stop,
Yeah,
don't they?
yeah.
Before they can carry on.
That's almost American sitcom type. That just brief moment,
Yes.
isn't it?
But you
It's their last huzzah.
But you said,
isn't it?
Lisa, about how they play women.
Yes, badly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you said, what, Melvin Hayes is the
Melvin
only one...
Hayes is the only one who
that's
walks
vaguely convincing.
vaguely convincing as a woman. Everybody else walks like a man dressed as a woman with bandy legs.
Yeah.
Their legs apart. Women do not walk bow-legged with their legs apart.
Vivian Brackett do.
Well, that's because they're men dressed as women.
Are
Again,
they?
it's the joke, isn't it?
Are they?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
But
Yeah.
Stuart McGugan is amazing in that, because he comes in.
And he
Total
looks,
resentment for
yes,
having
he
to
looks
do it.
so surly, doesn't he?
He's
It's
a
like,
butch soldier, totally crestfallen by
Yeah.
it. He's all made up, isn't he?
Yeah, but you were...
And I think it's the Scottish thing as well
Yeah.
that just does it as well, isn't
But
it?
the captain and the colonel have got some brilliant scenes as well.
Yeah, I put them akin to a sort of married couple, weren't
Yeah.
they? And they were having their little domestic spat in the corner, weren't they?
as you said, Mannering and Wilson.
You
Yeah.
can draw parallels between the Mannering and
Absolutely, yes.
Wilson relationship.
Yeah.
Wilson.
Wilson.
Not been on the owl. But when the colonel points out that he's a colonel,
Yeah.
and although the captain's given him a piece of his mind finally,
He-
he's still the one in charge.
Yes.
And that is the Mannering Wilson
Yes.
thing. I've got
Yeah.
3 pips, and
Yeah.
don't you forget it.
So do you think that they've made up for the fact that Dad's Army didn't have that ending?
Yeah.
Because the ending of Dad's Army was in the first episode, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Where they sat round the table.
Because I always wondered what the D-Mob episode of Dad's Army would
Yeah.
be like. And although you get that tribute scene to the real Home Guard at the end of it, you could have done another season, you know, beyond that. But this is very much, we're writing an ending, and I love the fact that it's not just done in one episode.
They spread it out over
it's
two.
spread out over two.
You don't rush. It's a slow burner. You're bringing the emotional tension up within the audience and the viewers, aren't you?
And that final shot of the ship going out is amazing, as the camera just draws back and back and back and back. We can't quite work out where it was filmed.
No.
But
If anybody knows, let us know.
we've had about
because-
3 or 4 different
There's
answers.
also an uncomfortable shot, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yes.
It's an uncomfortable situation where the Punkawallahs are saying...
The Charwalla.
Charwalla, saying all these beautiful things about this.
And increasingly they can't hear him because the ship's getting further and further away. He's having to shout louder and louder.
And they're just realise how they were treating people, perhaps.
Yeah.
And also there's a point in this as well.
And he's shouting, "I have gifts."
Yes,
as well.
Yeah.
And it's-
yeah. And there's a point that I'd not noticed before, where he says he'd like to go to England because you know, and they can shout at him all day and call him names. And as you said, the only people that are being racist in this particular episode are the Indian character and the Chinese character.
Yeah.
Everybody else, you know, obviously there's not time for it in this episode.
But a nice little bit as well is because Lofty's not there, and they have to give the performance to the garage owner.
Yeah, to get a
It's
fan
the
bounce.
colonel and the captain.
Yeah.
But as you said, Lisa,
Just give him the sheet music. He doesn't know the words, and the colonel's reading it out to him. I'm like, just give him the piece of music and let him read it.
But that then
But
gives
it's
him that
adding to the comedy.
fantastic
Yes.
line that says
Yeah.
of him just turning to him at the end and said, "Well, that wasn't difficult, was it?"
but then he's trying to wear
Lofty's
trousers.
as well.
And the trousers are so short. They do like their short trousers thing, David Croft,
'cause
doesn't he?
that was in the Are You Being Served we watched as well.
It was very much a Laurel and Hardy moment with his trousers drop,
Yes.
weren't they? And
Yeah.
they all
Sort of cluster
gather
around
around him, don't they?
Yeah, to
So his
prevent his...
dignity.
Yes.
But lovely episode, I think,
Yeah.
all round, and very much looking forward to seeing the next one now.
Very much so.
So yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there and come
Yes.
back again with some more thoughts.
Okay.
See you soon then.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. So, the last roll call.
Yes.
That was really sad,
It was
wasn't it?
quite sad, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. It's the way they sort of give in the end theme. They give it a little bit of echo, and it starts to fade away
As the train
draws away out of the station.
And the titles went up, and it was very quiet in here, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
But you see what I mean about it being an actual ending to the series.
Yes.
And just for those last few minutes, you don't want the episode to end, do
No,
you?
you'd actually quite like to see what happens to Sergeant Major Williams. In particular.
Yeah, this is the episode not only where they're coming home, but where the Sergeant Major's entire world has just come crashing down around him, hasn't it?
Yeah.
There's the wonderful shots of them individually in the carriage,
Yeah.
and they're just looking out of the window, and it's just their eyes say it all, don't
Yeah.
they? There's fear, there's anticipation, there's trepidation. What are they going to?
Yeah.
And it's the attitude as well, because they've been out in Burma fighting all this time, and they come home, and I think they expect to be treated like heroes, and they're not.
No.
Because there's been so much fighting going on that everybody's tired of it and sick of it, and nobody actually appreciates it now.
No.
It's a very bittersweet episode, actually. Because it starts off with this sort of rather strange animation of the ship sort of coming
Because obviously
home.
there's no way of doing that on the budget.
Yeah. But then, even when they get to port, as we cynically said, the reason it's foggy
is to hide it's the same place.
Is to hide the fact that they're filming where they were last week.
And they did use the same person who played the MP in the previous one, but he has it back to the... But you can clearly tell it's him. But yes.
But then they immediately run into customs, don't they?
Yes.
So they have to make their declarations about whether they've got any sort of rubies or heavy machinery or perfume.
Because I thought they were going to open... I forgot they didn't, but I could imagine them opening...
Glorious
Case
and
all these women's underwear.
But as Gloria says, are you joking? We've been up the jungle. You know, it's like, where are we going to get heavy machinery from?
But yeah, the captain and the colonel, they have a problem coming up against everybody they meet. The captain always wants to take everybody's name because he doesn't think they're treating them with respect. And you say that there's a lot of class commentary going on here as well. That, you know, that they're real idiots, aren't they? The captain and the colonel. And I don't know sort of much about their background, because there's a line about his chauffeur or his butler, his gardener or whatever, and I don't know, what they're actually going to. You can sort of guess what the men are going to, their families or whatever. The Sergeant Major is supposedly going for this job in a prison, but that doesn't happen, so he's got nothing to go to. But
I think it's very much a case of they were masters of their own domain for so long, weren't they? And now they've come up into the small fish now in the big pond.
They've got to face the real world again,
and all the bureaucracy and all the sort of pettiness of real life.
Everyday things that people would have been used to deal with,
and
it's all been removed from their lives.
Rationing coupons and clothing coupons, and
But you get the scene where they're in the pouring rain. Clearly, they've got the rain machine out, and the Sergeant Major's just drilling them because it's the only thing that he's got left.
It's the only thing he's clinging desperately. And Windsor does that so well. It's the total disintegration of a person, because he desperately doesn't want to let this go.
So like cleaning the coal is all he can think of at this point, And then the captain and the colonel come in with their umbrella, see what he's up to, and just walk away because
it's so desperately sad, isn't it?
Yeah. But then you get the captain and the colonel saying goodbye to the men. I won't forget you, gunner Clearly proving that they don't care about the men at all. Whereas the Sergeant Major actually does.
Yes. He's hard on them, but he knows all their names, he knows their little foibles, everything like that.
And I love the bit where they're going to go through the two doors, one for the officers and one for everybody else. Well, I guess this is where we say goodbye. They go through the door and the set has been designed so that on the other side of the door it's the same room. That's a little... A, it's a good joke, but B, it's telling that now they're back in society, the same two doors will lead them to the same place.
Yeah.
Then you've got Bill Pertwee handing out the jackets and
Yeah.
Geoffrey Seagull as well.
Yeah.
Seagull?
Seagull. I think. I don't know. Mr. Perkins from Rent-A-Ghost.
But yeah, what's the line about? What's it? Where they're trying to fit out Lofty, some boys' shirts with fat necks. And then because they'd all planned to like tell the sergeant major what they thought of him, you know, sort of make a gesture or say rude words or punch him.
When it came up to him, he was such a sad, deflated character, and they said that, didn't they? He looked so sad.
And it's that lovely thing of you hand the bloke your little card, he stamps the card, and suddenly you're called Mister.
Yes.
And that's your whole world changing there in just a fraction of a second, just by that stamp going on that bit of paper. And then, of course, once they're in the real world again, they can't be bothered to
harangue him, no.
Because you said the look on Gloria's face when he's called Mister for the first time. He's like sort of rabbit in headlights almost, isn't
He's
he?
forgotten what it's like to be called Mister.
Well, yes, they've been fed, they've been watered, they've been drilled.
All their needs have been taken care of.
They've been put part of a large family, and now they're not. They're on their own.
Yeah. But and then we get the final few scenes in the sort of cafe bit. There's no. I like the fact the beer runs out.
No beer.
And again, that's a dad's armyism, you know. But then that uncomfortable bit where the captain and the colonel don't know how to talk to them.
Yes.
Because they're just sort of citizens now.
Because they've never really had to speak to them, have they? No. They go through other people, don't they?
So suddenly there's some very uncomfortable small talk, and they're basically glad when they get out of there.
Because they're so happy when they're sat in their first class compartment. And everyone else is cramming down onto the train, aren't they?
And then from here on, it is Windsor Davies's show for the till the end of the episode. Really.
I think quite rightly too.
Yeah, because you said, Lisa, we should just say about how clever his sort of performance is here, isn't it?
It is, because he doesn't want them to know, because they ask him, is he going to Parkhurst or wherever, and he says, oh no, there's been a hold up,
but he won't admit it.
But he won't admit that they've refused him the job because he's too old. But Gunner Parkin can see through that, so he comes back to see him, and he says to him, well, you can come and stay with Mum and me.
I think the whole troop saw through him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Apart from the officers.
And then it's role reversal, isn't it?
But I like the feeling that I get that he's just been rescued.
Yes.
Because what would have happened to him?
He would have just gone to live in some grotty little room and Now he's going back with Gunner Parkin and his mum, who was he's an old flame of his, isn't she?
That's right.
So
So I think all the pieces fall in where they deserve to in this last episode.
Unexpectedly so in some cases.
But it feels right.
Yes.
I think that's the thing, and that's the genius of the plotting here, I think.
And you can't leave it untold.
Yeah.
You can leave the untold story of what are they going to, but you cannot leave them at such loose ends, because they literally go through individual characters. What are you going to do now?
Yeah. And I love the fact the final post-credits scene goes to Dino Shafiq writing his letter. He's just wiggling his pencil up and down with his chara and by him. I don't know why he's still got it, but he's saying how he's going to come and open a restaurant in Bradford.
The beautiful city of Bradford.
Yes.
And we all chuckled.
But
I think it's a real reflection, and it's probably a reflection of the way David Croft and Jimmy Perry felt when they left the army at the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
That you've done all this, you've put your life on the line, you fought for king and country, you get home and nobody cares. And the world is grey and depressing and rationing still in. And it's almost
life
like...
has been going on whilst you've been away.
And it's almost like, what was the point? What have I been fighting for? Because nobody's actually
and I don't think
caring.
You can... If you use it in a drama programme, it's throwaway. If you use it in comedy and mix it with comedy, it sticks with the audience.
These two
and
episodes
resonates.
Especially, it's the bit where the laughter suddenly stops.
Yeah.
And I think that makes the character stuff really hit home a lot more.
Yeah. There's also some uncomfortable laughter over the two.
Yeah.
Where you realise it is such a life-changing experience for all of them, from leaving the war to going back to normal life.
Yeah. But yeah, I think those are two.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to see some 8.5 Hot Mums,
Yeah.
even on their own, I think they work really
standalone,
well.
absolutely.
You know, you don't necessarily need to have seen the whole of the series
That
beforehand.
will help you with the characters.
It will help you,
Yeah.
but I think you can almost come to these cold, and they still really work.
But
So-
Windsor is just head and shoulders above
Yeah.
the crowd, isn't it?
Just his little twitches, his face pulling, you know, the sort of.
I want that cold gleaming.
And as you said, the sort of look of sadness and disappointment.
It was the two-hander, the brief two-hander in the buffet, and when they had the close-ups on them, I was just watching the eyes, nothing else. The eyes, and those two actors were marvellous with that, because his so-called illegitimate son, perhaps, has gleaming. I want you to come home. I want you to come home.
Yeah,
and the absolute shock and disbelief of somebody's accepting and is happy to have him in their home.
Yeah. Well, so thank you everybody, but thank you
thank
Windsor
you.
especially.
And we should just say, as a sort of postscript about Windsor Davies, that he didn't just do comedy.
No.
You know, we've seen him he's in it's a very bleak episode of Dixon of Dock Green, but it's a pretty good episode.
Yeah.
He's in a Crown Court episode.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Obviously, he's in Doctor Who Evil of the Daleks.
Yeah.
And you said he's in some New Scotland Yard,
Yeah,
and
he's in UFO as well.
Yeah,
yeah.
and
So he pops up in all sorts of
the
things,
Avengers.
yeah.
So don't just think of him as a comedy actor.
No.
He's
No.
a superb
He's an actor.
actor
He's
who
an actor,
can
yeah.
do comedy very well.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
So,
And comedy is the most difficult thing to
yes.
do.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody.
No, thank you.
And we'll say to her then.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The voice to entertain you. B-O-B-O-Y-S, voice to entertain you. And of hope and glory, mother of the... Shut up!
That was episode 32 of Round the Archives.
Starring Lisa Parker, Andrew Trowbridge, Warren Cummings, Martin Holmes, Bob Fischer, Andrew T. Smith, Paul Chandler, and Nick Goodman.
On the musical side, you heard Dan Tate and Paul Chandler.
The scripts for It Ain't Half Hot Mum were by Jimmy Perry and David Croft.
And the producer was David Croft. Just a little bonus thing
Yes.
for this episode.
Yes.
Boner?
Bonus.
Oh, bonus.
Boner. Well, a bonus thing.
Bonus
hopefully.
boner.
Yes.
Indeed. As 14th of February 1969
Saw the
saw
passing
the passing of Kenneth
of
Horne.
Kenneth Horne, yes.
And with this issue coming out in February 2019,
Yes.
that's 50 years.
It
so
is.
we're called Round the Archives.
We
It's
are.
not a coincidence that
No.
that's not a million miles away from Round the
Yeah.
Horne.
No, we'd listened to an awful lot of Round the Horne, hadn't we?
Well, we needed a format when
Yeah.
we were planning episode 1, and I always say steal from the best.
Yeah.
And I love the way Round the Horne works.
Because it's all different things.
Yeah, it's a sort of mixed bag of things, but it's got regular contributors, if you see what I mean. And that's what I was always hoping we'd build up for Round the Archives.
And we have.
So
wonderful house style with it.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
but it's very obvious that especially the early issues, I virtually rewrote jokes from the opening episode. The opening of episodes of Round the Horne, like the answers to last week's quiz or things like that.
Yeah.
And our end credits, of course, use the exact same format. That was Round the Horne, starring, written by, and the producer was. Because we've just listened to an episode from season 2. And Warren, you came with us to see it being done on stage in Poole.
The second time it came to Poole.
Oh, was it the second time?
Yes.
We saw it at Poole years ago now.
Yes, a few years back now.
Yeah.
And then it came again 2 years ago.
And then we suggested to you, Warren, that you might like to come and see. Did you know much Round the Horne?
No. You played me some Round the Horne. I'd heard of the series.
Yeah.
And I knew nothing about it until you played that.
Okay.
I'd not heard anything about that, but I was aware of the series. And the stage show was amazing.
Now you've heard an episode on CD. Do you imagine what's going on the stage?
Yes, absolutely.
Because you know the way it works. That they're doing their scene, and Kenneth Williams will interject or something like that. And that was very well captured, I think, in the stage show. That although there is a script and they stick to the script, there's still room to embroider around the edges.
Absolutely, yes.
And I must say, when we saw it on stage both times, I found myself everybody was very good, and the actor that was playing Kenneth Williams was very good, but I found myself watching the actor doing Hugh Paddock more, because he was slightly playing up to the audience, but not quite so outrageously as the actor playing Kenneth Williams. And I don't know if Hugh Paddock used to do that or not, but it was just quite nice. I found myself watching him quite a lot.
But the show itself, you've got some major stars there, but the show itself is Round the Horne. So he's the one that holds it all together and gives it an air of respectability.
This is what I can say. He is your archetypal BBC radio
voice.
Yeah.
It's very professional.
And never loses that.
No.
And but it's what goes on around him and he's dragged into.
Yeah. And I think in some ways that even that sort of approach, you can see some parallels with what we try to do, because yes, we do pee about and we're very, very silly, and we do get as much rude innuendo in there as possible. But I think our equivalent of Kenneth Horne is trying to get the facts right as much as possible.
Absolutely.
So we're trying to be respectable in that, in that respect. But in other ways, and we've done it increasingly, I think. The more stuff we do with you, the more we try and get rudery in there, but played absolutely straight
down the line. It's the only way to play rudery, isn't it?
It is.
But do you find that we might, if we've all known each other 30 years ago, we wouldn't have done it in this style?
No.
But now we've got.
Well,
Matura, we would say. We have a subtler way of putting the rudery in.
Yes, I think it's true that we all know what each other's thinking when we're talking about anything.
Yeah.
So we're
Stop it, Lisa.
Yeah. So we're able to help each other with our sentences if we can't think of a word.
Yeah.
But equally, if I say something slightly innuendo-ish, you can work with that, can't you?
Yeah.
So. Yeah, but I don't. We've never really talked about radio comedy in Round the Archives, and this was always a thing for TV, history. But I think people sometimes sort of don't listen to old radio comedy enough, and there's a hell of a lot of it out there that really is worth it, because there are radio shows that are adaptations of TV shows, Dad's Army, Steptoe and Son, and those work really well. But for something that is pure radio, like Round the Horne
or the Navy Lark,
I mean, we listened to the one we listened to was about Moby Duck, wasn't it? It was the play at the start, and it just does conjure up weird images.
I had almost a Captain Pugwash type cutout of a duck.
Yeah, I was
moving along.
How did you visualise it?
Yeah.
I'm interested in. And then sort of Kenneth Williams would come in doing his sort of seaman's accent, as it, ooh ah, and then he'll just drop in always, and then he'll drop into his like other
Snide
persona.
voice.
Yeah.
The snide persona.
Because what they're saying about Kenneth Horne is playing young cuck powder with his long blonde hair. Oh, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Don't have to use your imagination. But I also find that Round the Horne really, really rattles along.
Yes.
Yes, we do tend to skip over the song.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they're chaptered, so you can just press a button and ignore the song. But that zoomed by, I think.
Absolutely.
And I think, again, that's what we're trying to aim for. We
pace.
we might do long articles about some things, but I think we try and keep the pace. And we are still trying to do a piece of entertainment here, aren't we?
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's not just going to be a boring list of facts. So I think Round the Horne influences us in lots of ways.
I think a hell of a lot more than we actually take credit for.
Yeah.
sometimes.
So 50 years after the passing of Kenneth Horne, thank you for giving us a format that we're still building on. So, Round the Horne.
Have a listen.
Definitely.
You won't be disappointed.
No.
Boner.
Mm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.